Welcome back to the Old Photo Vault channel. The Last Vigil, rural Pennsylvania, 1891. The photograph shows a plain bedroom, the kind meant only for sleeping and recovery, with white sheets pulled tight and the window curtain barely visible at the edge. Clara Whitmore sits upright, hands folded carefully over her husband's chest, as if she is keeping him in place. Thomas lies there peacefully, his uniform brushed and buttoned, his mouth caught in a faint, almost familiar smile. Clara remembered how he always looked relieved once he could finally rest. When the picture was developed, neighbors remarked on the pale blur behind her shoulder, shaped like a man standing patiently in the corner. Clara said nothing. She knew Thomas had died 2 nights earlier, and that she had sat alone with his body until dawn. What troubled her was simpler. She could not remember leaving the room, yet she was certain someone had stayed behind. The chair on display. State Museum, Ohio, 1937. The museum room was quiet in the afternoon, smelling faintly of polish and old paper. Eleanor Price sat very still in the wooden chair, hands resting where the guide told her to place them, smiling because her sister insisted on a photograph. It was meant to be educational, a harmless imitation of justice from another era. The helmet felt heavier than expected, pressing her hair flat. Behind her, a vase of artificial flowers stood where real ones never lasted long. When the photo came back, the staff noticed a pale figure beside the chair, shaped like a woman waiting her turn. Eleanor felt cold when she saw it, though she laughed and said the camera must have caught a reflection. She did not say that she had felt watched the entire time, or that when she stood up, the chair seemed reluctant to let her go. The Christmas They Never Finished, Cedar Falls, Iowa. December 1978. It was meant to be a simple holiday photograph, taken just as everyone leaned in to admire the tree. The living room smelled of pine and coffee, and someone had left the radio playing softly in the kitchen. The flames rose faster than anyone expected, bright and almost cheerful. And the family laughed at first, assuming it would be easy to smother. In the picture, you can see their faces caught between delight and confusion. Hands half raised, not yet afraid. Only later did anyone notice the thin, gray shape forming beside the cabinet, shaped like a woman standing very still, watching the fire climb. Aunt Margaret said it was just smoke, nothing more. She never mentioned that the shape wore the outline of her mother's old house dress, or that after that Christmas, every tree she brought home smelled faintly of ash before it was ever lit. The face in the control room. Chicago Recording Studio, 1984. It looks like an ordinary snapshot, taken after a long session, when everyone was tired, but pleased enough to smile anyway. Laura stands with her arm lightly around her younger brother, both of them leaning toward the mixing board, its rows of switches and lights quiet at last. The room smells faintly of dust and warm electronics. Behind them, the dark window reflects almost nothing, just the suggestion of another room where cables are coiled and left alone overnight. No one noticed anything strange at the time. It was only years later, after the studio closed, that Laura saw the pale face hovering in the glass, watching them with a calm, unfinished expression. She tried to remember who else had been there that night and could not. What unsettled her most was not the face itself, but the way it seemed patiently familiar, as if it had been listening to them for years, waiting for its name to be spoken aloud. The picnic that kept a seat, Midwestern suburb. Summer 1946. The photograph shows a tidy picnic under a fringed umbrella, the kind sold with promises of calm afternoons. 4 people sit close together, plates balanced on their laps, paper cups lined neatly in the center. Margaret Lawson is smiling at the camera, careful not to squint, while her sister adjusts her fork as if the moment might stretch longer than expected. Nothing appears unusual at first. Later, someone notices the faint discoloration on the house behind them, just above the windows. A soft blur, shaped like a face, pressed gently into the siding. Margaret said the film must have aged badly. She did not mention that they had set out 5 chairs that day, or that her youngest brother had been called inside just before the picture was taken. What troubles the viewer now is not the mark itself, but how naturally everyone seems arranged around the space it left behind. The guest who wasn't invited. Brooklyn, New York, 1952. The photograph captures a crowded living room, warm with laughter and the clink of paper cups. Men loosen their ties, women lean into one another on the sofa, and someone has just told a joke that hasn't finished landing yet. Everything feels properly full. When the picture was taken, no one noticed the shadow near the back wall, shaped like a man standing where no one stood. It blends easily with the coat rack and the open door, a posture too ordinary to question. Years later, when the photo was found again, Margaret traced the outline with her finger and felt an old discomfort return. She remembered counting heads that night, setting out drinks, wondering why she kept stepping aside in the hallway. The troubling thing is not that the shadow looks human. It's that everyone else seems to be making room for it, smiling as if they knew it belonged there. The Woman Who Stayed Standing. Phoenix, Arizona, 1963. The photograph feels playful at first, the kind taken to remember a good mood. Helen lounges across the green sofa, one leg stretched long, cigarette lifted like a small joke she's telling only to the camera. The room is neat in the way mid-century rooms often were. Cushions placed just so. Flowers arranged to look casual. In the far corner, near the plant in the open doorway, the light thins oddly, as if the room forgets itself there. It looks like a woman standing, bare-legged, patient, her shape no darker than the wall behind her. Helen said later she'd felt unusually observed that evening, though she laughed it off and poured another drink. When the photo was developed, she noticed the figure seemed to be watching her leg, not with envy, but with recognition. Helen had broken that leg years before. She could never remember who had been with her in the hospital room, holding the place she hadn't yet learned to stand on. The Breath at the Altar. Community Hall, Missouri, 1992. The photograph was taken during a quiet service, when the room had settled into listening. Folding chairs creaked softly, and someone near the back raised a hand to their face, as if the air had grown dry. At the front, the speaker stood behind a small lectern draped with paper flowers, her voice steady, practiced. Nothing seemed unusual at the time. Later, when the picture was developed, a pale blur drifted across the frame, shaped like a breath exhaled too slowly, lingering above the heads of the audience. It appeared to lean toward the altar, attentive. Mrs. Collins said it must have been cigarette smoke from outside, though no one had smoked indoors for years. What unsettled her was not the shape itself, but the memory that returned with it. Her husband's final night, when he tried to speak, released one long breath and seemed to listen to something just beyond the room before he was gone. The Man Who Didn't Work. Timber mill outside Duluth, Minnesota, 1911. At first glance, it looks like a routine photograph taken at the end of a workday, when the men had washed their hands and stood still long enough to be counted. 8 laborers pose among beams and saws, their sleeves rolled, faces set in the patient seriousness of men used to being recorded without ceremony. The air appears heavy in the image, as if the mill dust never quite settled. Only later does the faint haze draw attention. A pale shape drifting between them. Too tall to be smoke, too narrow to be light. It resembles a man standing just behind the bench, hands at his sides, waiting. No one remembered him when the photo was passed around. The foreman insisted he knew every worker by name. What unsettled him was that the shape stood exactly where a man had fallen through the rafters that spring, a place they still avoided without knowing why. The Window That Wouldn't Clear. Suburban apartment, New Jersey, 1979. The photograph shows a woman caught mid-motion, sleeves pushed up, one hand braced as she wipes the glass. The kitchen behind her is ordinary. Stacked plates, pale cabinets, the quiet order of a weekday afternoon. Her smile is small, private, as if she's thinking of finishing soon and sitting down. Time has damaged the image badly. The surface is clouded with stains and scratches, places where the picture seems to be erasing itself. Only after looking longer does the second figure emerge, faint but deliberate, standing just behind her shoulder. Its face is softer, older, and pressed close to the glass, as if trying to see through from the other side. Eleanor said the photo was ruined by moisture, nothing more. She never explained why. After that day, she stopped cleaning the windows, or why she insisted they were already clear, even when no one else could see out at all. The third embrace. Suburban living room, Oregon, 1998. It looks like a happy snapshot, taken in a hallway where the light always turned warm in the evening. Daniel and Lisa are pressed together, smiling the way young couples do when they believe the picture will only ever belong to them. Her arm is hooked around his neck, his hand steady at her waist. The curtains behind them are half drawn, the room quiet, expectant. At first, the eye catches nothing else. Then the figure in the background becomes difficult to ignore. A dark shape standing just far enough back to be mistaken for shadow. Its face pale and unfinished, watching them hold each other. Lisa said later she remembered feeling crowded that night. Though no one else was home, she laughed when she said it, embarrassed. What the photograph suggests, quietly, is that they were not alone in the moment they thought they were most complete. That someone else had already learned how to stand exactly where love leaves room. The one who followed them home. Pine Barrens, New Jersey. Autumn 1932. The photograph appears gentle, almost tender, taken on a clear afternoon when the air felt clean enough to forgive hard years. Samuel has his arm around his wife, Ruth, holding her close as if the ground itself were unsteady. Their coats are worn but neat, hats pulled low against the light. Behind them, the trees blur softly, doing what forests always do, keeping their distance. It looks like a picture of survival, of having made it through something together. Only later does the third presence begin to form, standing just behind Ruth's shoulder, pale and unfinished, its face drained of detail. Samuel said the negative must have been damaged. Ruth said nothing. She remembered the walk home that day, how the path felt crowded though no one else spoke. What unsettles the viewer is not the figure's closeness, but the way it leans forward slightly, as if it knows the way back better than they do. The porch light that stayed on. Upstate New York. Winter, 1956. The photograph was taken quickly, before the cold numbed everyone's hands. Richard stands between the two cars, proud without quite knowing why. His coat buttoned wrong at the collar. Snow gathers at his cuffs and along the tires, quieting the whole yard. The house behind him looks ordinary. Clapboard siding, a porch that creaks in summer. Only when the picture was developed did anyone notice the pale figure standing in the doorway, just inside the shadow of the porch. It is shaped like a person pausing before stepping out, its face washed thin, unfinished by light. Richard said his mother must have moved, then stopped when reminded she'd been bedridden all week. What unsettles him years later is not the figure itself, but the porch light glowing faintly above it. He is certain he turned that light off before coming outside. He remembers thinking the house would be warmer if he hurried back. The figure in the undergrowth. Rural Georgia, 1919. The photograph is dark and uneven, taken beneath a thick canopy where the light never quite settles. Leaves crowd the frame, heavy and overlapping, and a man peers through them, his cap pulled low, his expression caught between curiosity and caution. It feels like a casual moment, someone calling out to be photographed before moving on. Only after a longer look does the pale shape appear below him, rising softly from the brush. It has the suggestion of a woman, her face calm, almost attentive, her body stretched unnaturally long, as if the ground would not let her stand properly. The family said it was a trick of exposure, light slipping where it shouldn't. No one mentioned that a young woman from the nearby farm had gone missing that spring, last seen walking into the woods at dusk. What lingers in the image is not her brightness, but the way the man above her seems to be looking past the camera, as if listening to someone calling his name from deeper in the trees. The mirror that kept its distance. Council House, Leeds, 2004. It looks like an ordinary hallway, narrow and practical, the kind designed only for passing through. The wallpaper repeats itself politely, and a small mirror hangs where someone once checked their hair before going downstairs. Nothing in the room suggests drama. When the photograph was taken, the house was empty, mid-renovation, cupboards open, tools left where they fell. Later, the dark shape in the mirror became difficult to ignore. It stands where no one stood, its outline uneven, as if part of it refused to enter the glass. The face within it is not clear, but it feels familiar, like someone you recognize by posture alone. The owners said the mirror had belonged to the previous tenant, an elderly woman who rarely left her room. What unsettles them now is not the figure itself, but the way it seems to be leaning back slightly, as though the mirror were a doorway it no longer trusted enough to cross. The Fourth Miner, Slate Quarry, Wales, 1908. The photograph shows three men standing at the mouth of the quarry, boots sunk slightly into the dust they carried home each night. Their lamps sit squarely on their caps, tools held the way they always were when someone said to stand still. It is a working picture meant to prove nothing more than effort. Only after time does the shape between them become apparent, pale and narrow, rising from the dark behind their legs. It looks unfinished, as if the camera caught someone mid-step and then forgot to finish the work. The men later insisted there were only 3 on shift that morning. The ledger agreed. What no one could explain was the extra helmet mark found that week on the wall underground, or why the narrow passage behind them collapsed shortly after. The unsettling thing is not that the figure appears to be standing with them, but that it holds no tool at all, as if its work had already been done. The chair she never sat in. Private Studio, London, 1913. The photograph is dim and uncertain, the kind made by someone still learning how long to wait before closing the shutter. A woman stands behind a wooden chair, her hands resting lightly on its back, as if pausing before deciding whether to sit. The room is bare, with another chair placed to the side, angled away, unused. Nothing about it feels posed. It looks more like a rehearsal than a portrait. Over time, the image has thinned, the edges of the woman softening until she seems made of breath rather than flesh. The studio records say the exposure was too long, that the subject moved, but the assistant remembered something else. The chair was meant for her, yet she never lowered herself into it. What unsettles viewers now is not that she appears unfinished, but that the chair beneath her hands looks solid and patient, as though it has been waiting for more than a century for her to finally decide. The photograph. He didn't take alone. Dockside, Liverpool, 1904. The image shows a man standing stiffly near the water, his coat buttoned high, one hand resting on a rope as if he had only paused from work. It was meant to be a simple record, taken before the tide turned. The background is rough with smoke and mist, the air thick enough to soften edges. At first glance, nothing feels wrong. Then the pale figure beside him begins to separate from the haze, a woman's shape rising where the light should have faded. Her face is faint but attentive, turned slightly toward the camera. as though she understood its purpose better than he did. The photographer later said the exposure caught too much fog. The man disagreed. He remembered waiting alone that morning, feeling someone stand close enough to warm his arm. What troubles the photograph now is not the second face, but the way it seems clearer than his, as if she were the one meant to be remembered. The woman who looked back. Small apartment, Paris, 1926. The photograph is dim and scratched, taken late in the evening when the room had settled into its working quiet. A young woman sits at a desk cluttered with papers and ink bottles, her elbow resting where she has paused too long on a thought. The lamp above her throws a soft circle of light, leaving the corners of the room unfinished. She turns her head slightly toward the camera, surprised but not displeased, as if she recognizes the moment. Only after time does the other figure emerge, faintly visible behind her in the darker glass and shadow, standing upright, waiting. It looks like the same woman, older or thinner, her features less certain, her posture more patient. The photographer wrote it off as reflection and age. What troubles the image now is the woman's expression, how she seems less startled by being watched than by the feeling that she has already been here before, and that she is only remembering how the night ends. And maybe the most unsettling thing about these photographs is not what we see, but what we almost overlook. If these images are only accidents of light and time, why do they feel like memories trying to surface? Did you notice something others might have missed? Tell me in the comments what caught your eye, or which photo stayed with you the longest. If you enjoy exploring old photographs where something feels quietly wrong, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with the channel, because sometimes the past isn't finished looking back at us.